Over the past half decade, indie horror co-op games have dominated Steam, with titles like Lethal Company and R.E.P.O reaching 240 and 270,000 concurrent players respectively. And then we have Phasmophobia, the oldest, the father of Friendslop, if you will, reaching only half of that. And yet this game has outlasted any of them, even having a console release within the past year. And today we're taking a deep dive to find out what makes this game so successful and why has it stuck around for so long. The term Friendslop was coined actually just earlier this year in 2025, but retroactively it's been applied to a lot of games similar to these. When I made videos on these categories of games in the past, I've seen that the name can be extremely divisive, but you know, that's not the focus here. I know some people have very strong opinions about it, but we're really just looking particularly at why this one game was so successful. But just to give a brief definition of what people typically associate with this label is extraction type gameplay. You're going in somewhere, you're meeting a quota, collecting evidence, something like that, and then you're getting back out. Obviously, you're playing with friends. There are multiplayer games, particularly multiplayer games with proximity chat, which greatly add to the atmosphere of these games. There's no real way to beat the game. Finally, it can usually go on forever, and the real way that you progress through the game is through buying new equipment or upgrades through each new subsequent run. And nothing is really permanent in these games. When you die, you can lose everything and you're back to square one. And the last kind of common thread that people see across these games is they usually blow up due to viral clips online. And Phasmophobia shares all of these traits, with many games that do dying out very quickly over a year or two. But Phasmophobia has been around for over 5 years, and that begs the question, why is that? I think the major difference here is Phasmophobia built a lot more slowly increasing its depth over time with continuous dev support. And we're going to dive into exactly what that looks like and examine the lifespan of the game and see how this has resulted in where we are today. I think objectively just taking a look at the data and the player counts is our best place to start. And of course, there are more games that people consider part of this subgenre, but using Lethal Company and R.E.P.O, those are kind of like the top dogs, you know? Those are the ones that reach the highest heights, so I think they will be a good comparison point for today. At its all-time peak, Phasmophobia hit a concurrent player count of 112,000 people. By no means a small amount. But today, we're sitting at roughly 28,000, which for a game 5 years old, it's pretty good. That is roughly 25% of the all-time player base is on like today, like right now when I'm recording this. Lethal Company had a much larger peak, over double Phasmophobia's at 240,000 people. And at the moment, there is 6,500 people on, which is a very drastic decrease from its all-time peak. That's roughly 2.7% of the player base currently remaining. And lastly, we have R.E.P.O coming in at 271,000 concurrent players, with 33,000 players currently online, leaving us with 12.2% of the player base left. So you can see, while it might not seem as initially impressive because the concurrent players at launch is a lot lower than the other two, it's managed to hang on to a lot more of its players over time. This is especially impressive when you consider the lifespan of each games. Phasmophobia is 5 years old, and when you compare that to a game that released like R.E.P.O, them having similar player counts to date really says a lot about the game. But why is the player count so high? Why is the percentage of people still so high when compared to the all-time peak? Well, I think to answer that, we first need to look into the peaks themselves. Something to consider is the price of the games and the investment factor that's a result of this. Phasmophobia does have a slightly higher barrier to entry than the other two. It started on launch at $14, and through continual updates over time, it now sits at $20. It started at a higher price, and it now sits at double what these other games cost. And I know personally, this is kind of a thing for me, and I'm sure it is with a lot of other people. When you put more money, time, effort into something, you get that sunk cost where you want to get more out of it. So I think that could definitely play a part into why people want to spend more time in the game. They've put more into it and they want to get more out of it. And not only that, if you're willing to put up a little bit extra at the start, the people who are buying it are much more likely to actually be invested in what the game offers and interested in the premise of it. Where the other ones can seem a little bit more of a novelty, this is something people know they're gonna like or play for a long time, theoretically. And $4 isn't a big difference. Like, I totally get that. Like, $14 versus $10 isn't, gonna add an extra 100,000 players to the game, but I thought it could be something to think about or at least mention, because I'm sure it had at least a little bit of an impact. Moving on, we can get into the design and the actual depth of the gameplay. These games all contain tension, chaos, and scary moments, but I think somewhere where Phasmophobia sets itself apart is in its investigation aspect. A really strong point that Phasmophobia has is there's actually a bit of an intellectual element where you're gathering clues to figure out what type of ghost you're dealing with. Whereas a lot of these other games, it's a lot more directly just gameplay based, where that's where your skill ceiling is, you know, the reaction times, your routes, stuff like that. And sometimes this can lead to a feeling of these maps just being unbeatable, where you're having bad RNG. You know, it gets late, there's just a monster directly in your way. There's not really a lot of ways you can outsmart it, stuff like that. This can definitely happen in Phasmophobia, but I feel like it's a little bit more on you for poor planning or just not acting decisively enough. There's also not runs that are really strictly impossible. Like, I'm gonna pick on Lethal Company for a minute here. I like the game, but theoretically, if you go long enough, you're gonna have a quota that's just unbeatable. That's the end of your run. You're not really going into any runs here just completely screwed from the start. There's also even some capability for defense in the gameplay itself, where there are some telegraphed ghost attacks, and you can do things to prevent the attacks altogether if you play your cards right. Where a lot of these games are more what you see is what you get, which is fine, I think that this one has a little bit more depth than what meets the eye, which keeps people drawn in for longer. Now, I'm not going to pretend I'm like the most avid Phasmophobia fan and that I've even played the game super recently. I found this comment which gives an interesting perspective from somebody that seems to play the game pretty regularly on what they find appealing about it. They said, "Personally, the thing I love about Phasmo is the complexity. Without all the hidden abilities and mechanics of the ghosts, the game would frankly be very simple. My mate and I have returned after a break and are having way more fun than we ever did. We really like the jank of tier 1 items, and I think they make things more fun. Phasmo is a game where I firmly believe it becomes more fun the more you know about it. Nothing more satisfying than playing with one evidence and getting the ghost right based on a very niche behavior which you happen to recognize. Anyway, long message just to say that while everyone is different and the game can certainly feel overwhelming, I encourage you to stick with it and you'll start to pick up these things and get better." And this is kind of interesting because their opinion is kind of the more you know the game, the more fun you have with the game, when this can really be a weak spot in other games where when you know what's going to happen, it takes the fear out of it. I've certainly felt that way in several different games that fall into this genre. You've kind of seen all that it has to offer, and there's no real long-term progression or skill gap. So I think the idea of being able to learn like the more niche intricacies of the game over time could definitely give it a longer term appeal. There's also 60 pieces of equipment now, where last time I played there definitely wasn't that many, but they've also added an upgrade system to equipment. So there's a lot of variability in what you're able to actually bring on each hunt. There's also, like many other games, you know, there's different maps, different difficulties that you can play on, which can help keep things fresh or make it more accessible for people that aren't as familiar with the game or they're just beginners. And, you know, I think this is the major section that is kind of the make or break on these other games. And I think this is the inflection point that some of them are facing right now. And that's the updates, community, and the overall longevity of the game. Phobia has been supported for 5+ years. And in that time span, there's 12 pretty major updates that I could find. And in these updates, we've seen consistent new tools, ghosts, and locations. The longest period was a year between release and the first major update, and ever since then, there have been consistent smaller and major updates sprinkled in. R.E.P.O is off to a strong start with this, releasing their first update only 4 months after launch, which is better than the year between the Phasmophobia launch. So we'll see how that goes. This is the most recent game only being released this year, so, you know, nothing is set in stone, and we're gonna have to see how this does into the future. As you can see earlier, and I'll pop it up again, every major update here kinda has spikes, you know, brings people back into the game, which can be the case for any update. People are excited for new content, and when there's none available, that's obviously going to lead to a decline in players. Keeping a steady amount of new content flowing in will keep people coming back to the game every once in a while to check out what's new. The community for this game is also much larger than the other ones, and this can be due to just having a longer lifespan. It's grown over time, but based on the numbers, it just seems like this one is just overall a lot larger. Checking out the Reddits, the Phasmophobia one has like 130,000 people. When you compare to the other two, they're sitting at like 40 and 30,000. And it's kind of crazy that the Reddit has more than the concurrent players, when with the other two, it's been nowhere near the case. I think particularly for Phasmophobia, there's also a seasonal boost that kind of happens every year. This traditionally feels a lot more like a Halloween game, where people are returning every year to hunt some ghosts, where the other ones are just a little more generic horror games, I guess, maybe not leaning into the Halloween spirit as much. That's more just a personal opinion. It's not like super data supported or anything, but it's something that I have experienced. I think some people experience at least. And that's all good. I think a lot of people could objectively agree that most of that stuff is true about the game and maybe could make it stand out from the other ones a little bit. But at the same time, I could see this perspective of, the other games have had much higher player ceilings, so aren't those more successful objectively? Well, games all die. That's just a fact. Every game will die out one day. It won't be supported anymore. Maybe it'll move on to a new format, but in the state that it's released in, it just won't be like that forever. So it's kind of up to the individual person. What makes a game successful? Is it the amount of people that experienced it, the length that it's played for, or like the ratings of the game? Okay, this is actually really interesting. All 3 games have a 10 out of 10 on Steam, which I didn't actually know coming into this. I do also have this audience rating summary thing pulled up though, and Phasmo has a 4.6, R.E.P.O has a 4.7, and Lethal has a 4.4, but R.E.P.O has 63 ratings and Lethal has 200 ratings, while Phasmophobia has 1,200. So, that's just kind of more of a subjective measure where you can have your opinion on that. I could accept all of these as valid indicators of a game's success. Personally, I probably would lean towards, the games that last the longer being the most successful or, the most fun. But again, that's up to each person, but that's why I'm making this video. I was curious why this one has hung around for so long, because in my eyes, that's what's successful. So just to reiterate, what are some of the major problems with these other games? In a lot of these cases, there's a lack of depth where the gameplay doesn't actually evolve or change over time whatsoever. A lot of it is just get in, get out. It doesn't really depend on the map, nothing like that. Especially in the case of Lethal Company here, where I said R.E.P.O has already received an update. Lethal Company has not received a major update in 2 years, which explains why the player count is as low as it is right now, being like 20,000 less than either of the other two. And lastly, Phasmophobia just didn't blow up in quite the same way as the other two, where you have a lot of people flooding in, seeing these viral clips, and then fading away. Phasmophobia did have a bit of a boom like that, where I definitely saw some clips, but the presence wasn't the same as the other two, which I think led it the opportunity to just build a lot more slowly over time and really get a foundation underneath it. By combining depth, using unique pacing, and consistent developer support, this has built a foundation that's allowed the game to stand the test of time in a genre where other games struggle. I think this is just a testament to slow growth, not only in gaming, but just in general. You don't have to see success in something right at the beginning. And when you can pull back the lens a little bit, kind of look at the longer timeline of things, you can see a lot more progress than you would have thought you could make otherwise. By no means is it over or too late for these other games. There's a blueprint right here, just keep working on them, keep providing a valuable experience that can grow and change over time, and keep building that foundation. So this game is 5 years old, as I said. These other ones are only 2 and 1. We don't know what the future is going to hold. They could completely eclipse this game. We're going to have to see. But anyway, that's just my thoughts on it. It definitely seems to just have its own unique identity, as they all do, but this just had a lot of potential for longevity. Let me know which one's your favorite, if it's any of these, or if there's another game that you thought does it even better than Phasmophobia. If you watched this whole thing, appreciate you. Thank you. Make sure you drop a like and sub if you want to see more like this. We're doing Halloween stuff all month long. Halloween shirt. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.